Before we begin tonight, I want you to imagine something specific. Not a monster, not a ghost, not the kind of imagery horror usually starts with. Just a room, glass room, roughly 14 feet by 14 feet. Sitting on top of a steel platform 120 steps above the forest floor, surrounded on all four sides by windows, looking out in every direction at an ocean of dark trees that stretches to the horizon and beyond. There is no road visible from up here, no lights from any town or farmhouse, no sound except what the wind does to the structure when it moves, a low, settling groan that you learn to ignore. Because if you don't learn to ignore it, you will lose your mind inside the first week. There is a cot, a small stove, a radio, a compass, a pair of binoculars that are never far from your hand. And there is the dark. Miles of it, every direction. The kind of dark that, when you press your face to the glass and cup your hands around your eyes to block the interior light, has no visible bottom. The forest just goes and goes and goes, and somewhere inside all of that going, things are moving that you cannot see, that have no reason to announce themselves to you, that have been moving through those trees long before this tower was built, and will be moving through them long after it is gone. Fire, lookout, tower duty. It is one of the most isolated jobs a human being can voluntarily take. You are stationed alone for rotations that last between 10 and 21 days. In a glass room above the forest, watching for smoke in the daytime and maintaining radio contact and writing your shift log and doing all of the routine, practical, grounded things that a person in an unusual job does to maintain the illusion that the unusual job is ordinary. Most of the time, almost all of the time, that illusion holds. Most people who have done this work describe it as peaceful, clarifying, a specific quality of solitude that cities cannot provide. Most of them, the three people in tonight's accounts, are the other kind. The kind for whom the illusion broke, not dramatically, not with a single event that could be easily dismissed, but with the slow and specific accumulation of details that did not fit inside any framework. They had brought with them to the tower details that gathered until they could no longer be individually explained away and had to be considered as a whole. Details that told each of these three people, in the specific, quiet language of things that happen at 3 a.m. in a glass room above a dark forest, that they were not alone up there. I am going to tell you all three of their accounts tonight. I will tell them accurately and completely and without embellishment, because these stories do not need embellishment. They need to be heard by someone willing to sit in the dark and listen, exactly as they happened. My name is your host. This is True Terror Files Official. These are three true fire lookout horror stories that nobody on Night Watch will ever forget. Let's begin. 3 accounts. Here is what you are in for tonight. Story 1 is called The Light That Moved. The experience of a 29-year-old solo fire lookout named Sarah Nolan, stationed for a 14-day rotation at Paulina Peak Lookout in Oregon's Deschutes National, on Forest in August of 2021, who on the 6th night of her rotation, at 3:10 in the morning, observed through her tower binoculars a light moving through the trees below her. Not the orange spreading quality of a wildfire, but a single, compact, pale light, moving deliberately through the undergrowth at a pace she initially calculated as human walking speed, moving in a direction that she gradually realized, over 22 minutes of watching, was specifically toward the base of her tower. Story 2 is The Call Sign. What happened to a veteran fire lookout named Dale Whitmore? 20 years into his career and stationed at Potosi Lookout in Montana's Flathead National Forest, who at 4:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, in his third week of a solo rotation, received a radio transmission on a frequency that had been officially decommissioned by the U.S. Forest Service in 1974. A transmission that opened with his full legal name provided 3 pieces of personal information that Dale had told no colleague in 20 years of Forest Service employment, and closed with a single instruction so specific and so apparently sourceless that Dale has spent 11 years trying to determine who could have sent it, and what he found when he investigated the history of the call sign from which the transmission originated. And story 3 is the map that wasn't there. What a fire lookout and amateur cartographer named Asher discovered during her 4th month of a solo posting at Black Mountain Lookout in California's Shasta Trinity National Forest, when she spread her hand-drawn fire ignition maps across the floor of her tower on a sleepless night and overlaid them on the topographic survey of the region, and understood, with the particular clarity that arrives at 2 a.m. when your body's exhausted and your mind is fully awake, that the pattern she was looking at had not been created in 4 months, had been in progress for 11 years, across multiple previous lookouts, with a fixed center point that she was currently standing on. 3 stories. Let us go. Sarah Nolan was 29 years old, a wildland firefighter with 6 seasons of field experience, who had applied for fire lookout duty, specifically because she wanted the solitude and the particular kind of focused watchfulness that tower work demands. She was, by her own description and by the description of every colleague who has spoken about her since, exactly the right temperament for the job. Patient, observant, unhurried, not given to imagination or anxiety. The kind of person who could sit for 8 hours in a glass room above a forest and find that 8 hours had passed without her noticing because she had been genuinely absorbed in the act of watching, which is a quality that sounds simple and is in practice extremely rare. She had completed 5 days of her 14-day rotation at Paulina Peak Lookout in Oregon without incident. The days were hot and clear, and her visibility was excellent. The nights were cool and quiet, and she had been sleeping well on the cot in the corner and maintaining her log with the diligence the Forest Service expected. And she had reached that particular comfortable rhythm that a solo posting develops around the 5th day, when the initial strangeness of the isolation gives way to something that begins to feel like home. On the 6th night, she woke at 3:07 a.m. for no reason she could identify. Not a sound, not a dream, just the sudden and complete consciousness that sometimes arrives in the small hours, as if something has tapped you on the shoulder. She lay on the cot for a moment, confirmed she was fully awake, and then did what she had developed as a habit on the rotation. She got up, put on her fleece, picked up her binoculars, and made a slow visual sweep of the forest below from each of the 4 windows. The first 3 windows showed nothing, darkness, tree line, the specific impenetrable quality of an Oregon forest at 3 a.m., the kind of dark that gives nothing back. The 4th window, the east-facing one, showed a light. It was small and pale, not orange, not the warm amber of campfire or the spreading quality of a wildfire starting in dry brush, but a compact, cool, directed light that she initially identified as a headlamp. The kind of focused beam a hiker or a trail crew member would carry. And she stood at the east window and put her binoculars on it and watched it move through the trees below and tried to calculate the distance and the direction and the pace, because those were the things a lookout calculates. And the calculation she arrived at was this: the light was approximately 600 meters east of her tower base, moving through a section of forest that had no trail within 2 kilometers, at a pace consistent with a person walking without urgency. and it was moving west, toward her. She watched it for 12 minutes without touching her radio, because she was a methodical person and she needed more data before she made a call that would wake someone at base at 3 a.m. And in those 12 minutes, the light moved consistently, steadily, always west, always the same pace. Threading through the trees the way a light carried by a human hand threads through trees, with the slight bob and waver of something attached to a body in motion. At the 12-minute mark, she picked up her radio and called base. The duty officer who answered was a man named Greg Hollis, who had been doing overnight duty at the day shoot dispatch desk for 8 years. And he told her later that Sarah's voice in that call was the calmest he had ever received from a lookout reporting something they could not immediately explain. She described the light's location, its direction, its pace, its color, and the absence of any trail in that section of forest. And she asked whether any authorized personnel were known to be in the area. Greg checked the night roster and the trail permit database and called her back in 4 minutes. No authorized personnel, no permitted activity, no maintenance crew, no active search operation, nothing in the database that explained a light in that section of forest at 3:10 a.m. Sarah thanked him and hung up and put the binoculars back to the east window. The light was closer. She estimated it was now 350 meters from her tower base. It had covered 250 meters in the 16 minutes since she first saw it, which was consistent with her original pace calculation, which meant whatever was carrying it had not changed speed when the radio exchange occurred, had not turned, had not deviated, was maintaining the same unhurried walk toward the base of her tower. She watched it for another 8 minutes. She has described what happened at the 20-minute mark carefully and repeatedly in the years since. The light stopped. It was, she estimated, now approximately 150 meters from the base of the tower. In a stand of ponderosa pine she could see clearly with binoculars. And it stopped in the way a light stops when the person carrying it has stopped walking immediately, without the deceleration that a person unconsciously makes when coming to a halt. Just stopped. She kept her binoculars on the light, and it did not move, and it did not change character, and she could not, with the binoculars at their maximum magnification in that darkness, see anything attached to it. Not a figure, not a hand, not the dark mass of a body, just the light itself, hovering at about chest height in the trees, at rest. She stood at the east window with her binoculars on that stationary light for 11 minutes, and at the 11-minute mark, the light went out. She watched the space where it had been for 20 more minutes. Nothing. She called Greg at base and reported the update. He logged it and told her to call back if it reappeared. She went back to the cot at 4:05 a.m. and did not sleep. In the morning, at first light, she descended the 120 steps from the tower to the ground, because she was a practical person and she needed to know, and looking is the only way of knowing, and walked east through the forest to the stand of ponderosa pine where the light had stopped. She found, in the pine duff between 3 trees, a depression, a compressed area roughly 2 feet by 4 feet in the dry needles, the kind of compression that is made by something that has rested its weight in a space for a period of time. She found no footprints, none that she could attribute to the light, no footprints at all, in the loose stuff of a forest floor that should have taken impressions easily. No path of pressed needles leading to the depression, no evidence of approach from any direction. It's just the depression itself, in the trees, at the exact location where the light had stopped. She took photographs, filed a written report with the Day Shoot National Forest Office. and completed the remaining 8 days of her rotation because she was a professional and professionals complete their rotations. She has applied for lookout duty every year since. She says she goes back because she needs to understand it, and the only way to understand it is to sit in the same glass room above the same forest and watch again and wait for the east window to show her something she can this time follow all the way to its source. She says the detail she cannot rationalize. Not the light, not the pace, not the stationary 11 minutes, is the depression in the pine duff. She says she has spent 4 years trying to construct a scenario in which something approaches through dry pine duff, rests in it long enough to compress it, and departs without leaving a single track in any direction. She says she has not found one. Dale Whitmore had been a fire lookout for the U.S. Forest Service for 20 years when the transmission came in. And in 20 years of solo tower rotations, he had developed a particular philosophy that long practice. Jobs produce not complacency, which is different, but a settled confidence in the known parameters of the work. The knowledge of exactly what a tower rotation could present, and the specific toolbox he carried for handling everything it could present. A confidence that was not arrogance but competence. The confidence of a man who has been in the tower in every kind of weather and every kind of quiet and every kind of nothing for 20 years, and who has always come out the other side of it intact and knowing a little more than he did going in. He was stationed at Potosi Lookout in the Flathead National Forest in Montana, a tower he had been posted to 3 times before and knew well. At the start of his 3rd week of a 21-day solo rotation, he was not sleeping well, not from fear or anxiety, but from the specific insomnia that he had developed in his 40s, and that he's managed with the resignation of a man who has accepted something that will not improve. Getting up when sleep refused to come, and sitting in his camp chair with a cup of coffee and the radio on low as background, the way some people keep a television on when they are alone, and the quiet gets too specific. His primary radio operated on the Forest Service's standard designated frequencies, the channels he used for weather reports, for his daily check-in calls with dispatch, for any emergency communication. All of it logged and monitored and operating within the established infrastructure of the agency. He also kept an older radio in the tower, a surplus unit he had carried for years. A habit from his early career when he liked having a backup, and it was this older radio, sitting on the table near the east window, that woke him up. Not loudly, a low hiss of static, and then a voice. He has described the voice as male, clear, unhurried, with the flat, functional quality of someone transmitting information rather than conversation. It said, "Potosi, this is Victor Threat. Call sign for the occupant," confirmed Dale James Whitmore. Dale has said that in the first 2 seconds of hearing his full legal name from a radio he had not activated, on a night when no communication was scheduled, his entire body registered something before his mind had finished processing the words. A very specific physical response that he has described as not fear exactly, but the full body alertness of a person whose nervous system has correctly identified that the current situation does not have an established framework. He picked up the handset and transmitted back, because he was a 20-year professional and professionals respond to transmissions, and said, "This is Whitmore. Who am I speaking to? Identify your location and frequency." The response was immediate. The voice said, "Frequency Victor 38-1, decommissioned August 1974. Your mother's name was Eleanor." You have a scar on your left forearm from a saw accident in 2003 that you have never discussed with Forest Service Medical. You need to hear one thing and one thing only. Do not use the tower stairs after 4 a.m. tonight. When you come down in the morning, wait for full daylight. Do not use the stairs before the sun clears the eastern ridge. Dale sat in the chair in the dark of his tower for a long time after the transmission ended. His mother's name was Eleanor. He had never told any Forest Service colleague his mother's name, not because it was secret, but because it was the kind of personal information that does not come up in the professional conversations of people who work alone and communicate primarily about weather and fire. The saw accident was real. He had told no one at the agency. He had not filed a medical report. The scar was there on his left forearm, 23 years old, from an incident on private land before he joined the service. He transmitted back 3 more times that night. No response. The frequency was silent. He pulled the radio's manual the following morning and confirmed what the voice had said. The frequency designated Victor 38-1 had been decommissioned by the Forest Service in August of 1974. It had been assigned according to the historical frequency records he later requested from the regional office. To Potosi Lookout during the period 1968 through 1974, the call sign was registered to the lookout station itself, not to a specific individual. The lookout stationed at Potosi in the summer of 1974 was a man named Edwin Cross, age 31, who died in July of that year when the tower's propane heating unit failed and the resulting fire consumed the structure before he could evacuate. The tower was rebuilt on the same site the following year. Dale did not use the stairs after 4 a.m. that night. He sat in his chair with his coffee and his radio until the sun cleared the eastern ridge, which happened at 6:42 a.m., and then he descended. On the 7th step from the bottom, he was counting, because he was a methodical man who counted things when something had told him to pay attention. He stopped. The step was intact. The railing was intact. Everything was structurally normal. But on the surface of the 7th step from the bottom, in the wood itself, was a burn mark, not a stain. Not a discoloration from weather, but a clean, specific burn mark in the shape of a handprint. A full right-hand impression pressed into the wood, as if by something that had been very hot and had gripped the step. Dale photographed it. He filed a report that included the photograph and the full account of the transmission. The Forest Service maintenance team inspected the step and found no structural explanation for the burn. The investigation into the transmission source found no active radio equipment registered to the Victor 38-1 frequency and no technical explanation for how a signal on a decommissioned frequency could have reached his radio. Dale completed the rotation, has returned to Potosi twice since. He says he checks the 7th step from the bottom every time he descends, as a habit he cannot break and has stopped trying to. He says the question he has spent 11 years with is not who transmitted. He has made a kind of peace with not knowing that. He says the question he lives with is simpler and in some ways harder, whether whatever sent that transmission was warning him about something that was going to happen that night, or warning him about something that always happens at Potosi after 4 a.m., and whether there is a difference between those two things that matters. Kim Asher was 36 years old, a fire lookout with 11 years of Forest Service experience and a parallel practice as an amateur. Cartographer, she had been making hand-drawn maps since childhood, had pursued it seriously since college, and developed over years of practice the particular visual intelligence of a person who thinks spatially, who sees in geographic data the kind of narrative that other people see in text. The ability to look at a map and read it not as a reference document, but as a story with a structure and a development, and sometimes a meaning that the data's original collector had not intended to convey. She had been posted to Black Mountain Lookout in California's Shasta Trinity National Forest for 4 months. When the discovery happened, a longer posting than was typical. It was made possible by an agreement she had negotiated with the regional office, who valued her experience and her meticulous fire-spotting logs. And she had used the extra time to do something no previous lookout at that station had documented. She had been tracking and hand-mapping every fire ignition event in the surrounding forest, not just the significant ones that required official response, but every ignition, the small, self-extinguishing burns, the heat traces on her infrared scope, the smoke signatures she logged at the start of each shift. She recorded each event with a timestamp and a GPS coordinate and transferred it to her topographic map of the region every evening before her check-in call. Practice she found satisfying in the way that all systematic documentation satisfies a cartographic mind, the world being rendered legible one data point at a time. On a night in her 4th month, a sleepless night, the kind that comes with the territory and that she had learned to use productively, she spread all 4 months of her fire maps across the tower floor, overlapping them chronologically, and placed the regional topographic survey beneath them as a base layer, the way a cartographer works when building up a composite picture, letting the layers speak to each other. She spent approximately 40 minutes working with the composite before the pattern emerged from it, with the specific and disorienting clarity of something that had always been there waiting to be seen. The way an image resolves in an optical illusion, not because anything has changed, but because your brain has finally found the frame that makes it coherent. The fire ignition points, all 112 of them logged over for months, formed a circle. Not an approximate circle, not a rough clustering that could be described as roughly circular by someone looking for patterns. A circle of the kind that requires deliberate placement, each point at consistent intervals along the arc. The spacing between events regular enough that when she measured the gaps with her compass, she found a variance of less than 3% across the full circumference. She sat back on her heels and looked at what she had built on the floor of her tower and understood, with the particular quality of comprehension that arrives when data resolves into something your mind was not prepared to see, that she was looking at the boundary of something rather than a distribution of events, and that the center of the circle was the fixed point around which everything else was organized. She located the center mathematically, measuring from the arc. She transferred it to the topographic base layer. The center point of the circle was the GPS coordinate of Black Mountain Lookout. Her tower, where she was standing. She said the first thing she thought, not the second thing, or the considered response. The first thing. The immediate, instinctive thought that arrived before she could apply any analytical framework was that the circle was not complete. That the arc had gaps in it, consistent gaps spaced at regular intervals. And that what she was looking at was not a finished pattern, but a pattern in progress. One that was approaching completion from the outside in, each rotation of events moving slightly closer to the center. She requested the fire ignition records for Black Mountain Lookout going back 10 years from the regional office the following morning because she was a systematic person and she needed to know whether what she was seeing was unique to her posting. The records came back in 3 days. She spent an evening transferring 11 years of archived ignition data to her topographic map, working through a decade of her predecessor's logs. And what she found is the thing she has since described as the moment she understood that her 4 months of documentation had not started something, had joined something, something that had been in progress since 2015. Through 4 separate lookouts, through every season change and posting transition. Pausing each time the tower was between rotations, and resuming each time a new lookout arrived. Advancing slowly, methodically, from the outer boundary of the geographic radius inward, always inward, each year's events placed slightly closer to the center than the previous years. The circle tightening in the specific, patient way of something that has time and is using it. She checked the records of the previous 4 lookouts who had been stationed at Black Mountain. All 4 had transferred out after a single season. She contacted 2 of them, the ones whose contact information the Forest Service would provide. Both returned her initial message but declined to speak on the record about their posting. One of them, a man who had been stationed there in 2019, sent her a single-sentence reply: "I'm glad you found the maps. Now get out of the tower." Kim filed a full report with the Forest Service Regional Office, including her cartographic analysis, the composite map, and the archive data comparison. She was told the fire ignition patterns would be reviewed by the Environmental Monitoring Division. She completed the remaining 3 weeks of her posting. She is said, constitutionally unable to leave an incomplete rotation, and descended for the last time on a clear October morning. She has not returned to Black Mountain Lookout. The data she compiled is in a binder in her home. She takes it out sometimes and looks at it because she is a cartographer, and a cartographer cannot leave a map that tells a story without finishing the reading of it. She says the thing she has not been able to determine, and that she believes may not be determinable from outside the tower, is what the center point represents, not to her, not to the Forest Service, not to the academic or analytical framework she has tried to apply to it, but to whatever has been moving those fires, year by year, rotation by rotation, inward toward the fixed point above the trees. She says she looks at the map and she can calculate, from the rate of inward movement, approximately how many more years it will take for the fires to reach the center. She will not say the number out loud. She says it is a small number. 3 towers. 3 people who chose the most isolated watch on Earth and found something watching back. Sarah is still applying for lookout duty every year. Dale checks the 7th step every time he descends. Kame has a map and a binder at home, and a number she will not say aloud. What they all share, what every person in a story told on this channel shares, is that they got up the next morning and kept going, carrying something they could not set down and had not asked for and cannot return. That is the kind of courage that does not look like courage until you understand what it costs. This is True Terror Files Official. As tonight's stories did what this channel was built to do, subscribe. We post new horror every single week, and every story we bring you is real to someone. Drop a comment below. Story 1, 2, or 3. Which one are you still thinking about right now? We read every single comment. We're a small channel, and you being here matters. Until next week, stay out of the towers. If you are already in one, do not look down.